The auditorium lights dimmed slowly, like a sunset sinking beneath the horizon, and a hush settled over the crowd. It wasn't the usual kind of silence that came before a performance. This one felt heavier, expectant, almost fragile, as though everyone in the room sensed that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Backstage, 13-year-old Alina Carter stood alone in the shadows, her small hands trembling as she clutched the frayed ribbon tied around her wrist. It was faded now, once a vibrant blue, but time and tears had dulled it into something softer, quieter, like her voice had been for so long. 5 minutes, a stage manager whispered gently before disappearing into the maze of curtains and cables. Alina nodded, though she wasn't sure anyone saw. Her chest rose and fell unevenly as she tried to steady her breathing. The air smelled faintly of dust and warm lights, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the low murmur of the audience, hundreds of people waiting. Waiting for her. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't there anymore. She wasn't standing backstage at one of the biggest talent competitions in the country. She wasn't about to walk onto a stage that had swallowed stronger performers whole. Instead, she was back in a tiny living room, sunlight spilling through thin curtains, and her father's voice filling the space like music itself. "Sing it again, Lena," he used to say, leaning back in his worn armchair, boots kicked off, uniform still neatly pressed. "You've got something special. Don't hide it." Back then, her voice had come easily, like laughter, like breathing. Before everything changed, a sharp knock on the dressing room door. "Alina, we're ready for you." Her eyes opened slowly, the memory dissolving into the present. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the ribbon. It had belonged to her father. The last thing she had of him. The night the officers came to the door, she hadn't understood what their words meant. Service, sacrifice, hero. She only understood the silence that followed. The house had felt different after that, too big, too empty. Her mother tried to fill it with warmth, but grief has a way of seeping into every corner. And when her mother passed away just a year later, taken by an illness that moved too quickly, the silence became unbearable. Alina stopped singing, not because she couldn't, but because every note felt like it carried a memory she wasn't ready to face. Years passed like that, quiet, gray, until one day, her school music teacher, Mrs. Alvarez, heard her humming under her breath during class. It was barely audible, just a fragile thread of melody, but it stopped her in her tracks. "Alina," she said softly, kneeling beside her desk, "why don't you sing anymore?" Alina had shrugged, eyes fixed on her notebook. "I don't think I can." Mrs. Alvarez smiled. Not the kind of smile that tries to fix things, but the kind that understands. "Sometimes," she said, "we don't sing because we're afraid of what will come out. But that's exactly why we should." That afternoon, she handed Alina a flyer for the talent show auditions. Alina almost threw it away. Almost. But something about the way Mrs. Alvarez had looked at her, like she saw something worth saving, made her pause. Weeks later, she found herself standing in a much smaller room, singing for a panel of judges who barely glanced up at first. Her voice shook, cracked on the first note. But then something happened. She remembered her father's voice. Not the words, but the feeling. And suddenly, the fear didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip just enough. She sang. When she finished, the room was silent. Not empty, full, and that silence followed her all the way to the main stage. Alina Carter, the host's voice echoed through the auditorium, "You're up next." Her legs felt like they didn't belong to her as she stepped forward. The curtain parted, and the lights hit her all at once, bright, blinding. For a split second, she considered turning back, running, but then her fingers brushed against the ribbon again. And she took another step. The stage seemed enormous, stretching out before her like an ocean. At the center stood a single microphone, waiting. She walked toward it slowly, each footstep echoing in the vast space. The judges watched her closely. The audience leaned in. She reached the microphone and adjusted it slightly, her hands still trembling. For a moment, she couldn't look up. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely carrying. The host stepped forward. "What's your name?" "Alina." "And how old are you?" "Alina." 13. A gentle murmur rippled through the crowd. "That's brave," one of the judges said kindly. What will you be singing for us today? Alina hesitated. The question felt bigger than it should have. It's a song I wrote, she finally said. That caught their attention. Oh, another judge leaned forward. What's it about? She swallowed, her eyes flickering briefly to the audience before returning to the floor. It's about losing someone, she said quietly, and finding a way to keep going. The room stilled. Whenever you're ready, the host said gently. The music began. Soft piano notes, simple and fragile, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Alina closed her eyes. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence. And then, she sang. Her voice was soft at first, almost hesitant, like it was testing the air. But there was something in it. Something raw, unpolished, real. The kind of voice that doesn't try to impress. It tells the truth. Each word carried a weight that felt far too heavy for someone her age. It wasn't just a song. It was a story. Her story. About a little girl who waited by the door. About a house that grew quieter with every passing day. About a ribbon tied around a wrist, holding on to memories that refused to fade. As the melody built, her voice grew stronger, not louder, but deeper. More certain. The audience sat completely still. No whispers, no shifting, just listening. And then came the chorus. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was honest. A plea, a promise, a memory all at once. And somewhere in the second row, a woman wiped away tears she didn't even realize had fallen. One of the judges leaned back, exhaling slowly, his eyes glistening. This wasn't just a performance. It was something else entirely. Backstage, crew members who had seen hundreds of acts stood frozen, their tasks forgotten. Because moments like this, they didn't happen often. As the song reached its final verse, Alina's voice trembled, not with fear, but with emotion. The kind you can't fake. The kind that comes from somewhere deep inside, where words often fail. Her fingers tightened around the microphone. And for the first time since she stepped onto the stage, she looked up, really looked, at the sea of faces before her. At the lights, at the judges, and she didn't feel small. She didn't feel alone. She felt seen. The final note lingered in the air, delicate and aching, before fading into silence. Real silence. The kind that feels almost sacred. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. And then, the audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation. Thunderous. Unrelenting. But Alina just stood there, her chest rising and falling, her eyes wide as though she couldn't quite believe what was happening. The judges exchanged glances, each one visibly moved. That, one of them said finally, his voice thick with emotion, wasn't just singing. Another nodded. That was courage. The host stepped closer, his usual energy softened into something gentler. Alina, he said, where did that come from? She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ribbon on her wrist. My dad, she said quietly. He used to tell me to sing, even when I didn't want to. A pause. And now, she looked back up, her eyes shining. Now I think I understand why. The applause swelled again, but this time, Alina smiled. Not a big, triumphant smile. A small one, real, because for the first time in a long time, the silence inside her didn't feel so heavy. It felt like something else. Like space. Like possibility. Like light. And as she walked off the stage, the ribbon brushing softly against her skin, she realized something she hadn't been able to put into words before. Loss doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade or shrink or become something easy. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to face it, it can become something else. Something that doesn't just hurt. Something that heals. And in that moment, somewhere between the echoes of applause and the quiet hum of the stage lights, Alina Carter stepped out of the shadows of her past. And into something brighter. Something stronger. Something that was entirely her own. From loss to light.